God, and we give you thanks, we give you glory and praise in Jesus' name. And you may be seated. Again, thanks for being here. Thanks for those that may be tuning in online. Glad to have you with us today. And it is a joy to live for the Lord. No other way I would want to live but to live for God. So I've been trying to continue to learn things, and I started listening to a book Brother David recommended to me. It was Play the Man. Really good book. And it's a good book probably for, it's geared towards men, but there's a lot of stuff that just a Christian person would want to apply to their lives. But I would encourage you to pick it up and read it, or I got it on Audible actually, so I can listen to it. But it's very good, and one of the things as a Christian, we should have a desire in our hearts to continue to learn. I think that's a biblical principle. So when we apply biblical principles, this is one of the things, especially since we have the opportunity. I don't know if there's ever been a better day for this, because it's easier than it's ever been if you want to learn. I mean, all the resources that we have that they never had in the past, we do have now. And, excuse me. And one thing that we would want, I would think, is to improve our walk with God, because I think it's fair to say that none of us have reached perfection yet. But we want to strive for excellence. We want to strive for that higher calling and continue to learn. Just recently, I finished up a series on President Grant. And he was kind of the forgotten, tremendous president. He started out a very humble beginning. His parents were tanners. He didn't want to continue in that business, so more or less his father forced him and enrolled him into, what's the point? West Point. West Point Military Academy. And so he served there, and he served in the Mexican War. But after that, he got stationed out on the Pacific coast in kind of a dreary area. And there he kind of messed up and started drinking too much and so forth, and ended up resigning from the Army before he got court-martialed probably. So here you have this man, he goes back, and I think he's living in Missouri, and just doing odd and end stuff. He's tried real estate, failed at that, tried this, failed at that. Ended up, he's chopping wood and selling wood. Now, this is the future president of the United States of America, the general that's going to win the Civil War. And so he's just, having a hard time finding his place. But then the war breaks out. So he gets back into the war, and he starts commanding some things, and eventually he has some really great victories. He starts moving back up the rank there, and of course he was the general that took Vicksburg, and then later Chattanooga, and then he had some major victories in the Western theater. And the Eastern theater of the Civil War was kind of a mess. Lincoln couldn't find any good generals, that could stay in there and fight against Lee. But he got Grant. Finally got Grant. Grant was made lieutenant general, which was general over the entire army. And he was this bulldog that just stayed. He wouldn't leave. Just kept pressing. And I know at one point he was leading this against Lee's army, and his staff, assisting generals and so forth, would say, hey, the men are exhausted. We need to stop, rest a little bit. He says, we can't. He says, the enemy's exhausted too. We got to keep pressing. Got to keep going. And that's something, in life. Sometimes you just get exhausted, right? You get tired. It's the ability to keep going. Stay in the fight. It was what reason I brought this up, because it got down to so close this country could be totally different than it is today. Lincoln was up for a re-election, and this war has been going on now for 3-4 years. And it's a slaughterhouse. The media is working. They're reporting all this stuff, and just the same stuff that happens today. All this garbage. Media's really working on things, and and Grant's purpose and Lincoln's also was to keep the Union. And so you had to stop this, but then there was a guy running against Lincoln, I think it was McClellan. He was calling for peace and stuff. We'll just let the South go, and split the Union. And so Grant needed to have some wins, and this war with Lee kept going on. And also Sherman was down in Georgia. He's trying to take Atlanta. So finally he takes Atlanta, which breaks the supply lines for Lee. And eventually Lincoln gets reelected. Grant stays in, and eventually they win. But it just made me thought, what would have happened if those generals didn't stay in that fight? Then the Union would have been split. Would we be 50 countries now instead of 50 states? Because if one could split, then they all could split. How would you maintain it? Would there be a country to stop the war, World War I, stop the Germans in World War I? Would there have been a country to stop Hitler? If they did not pursue, you don't know the end of the thing, of what's going on, but the tenacity and the grit, the toughness that Grant had to stay in there when everything probably in his mind and in his spirit and what people are saying, is to stop, to quit, to rest. But he just keeps going. He was like the Energizer. Everybody, no, we can't stop this. Then on the terms of peace, when Lee finally surrendered, the terms of peace was, hey, you guys, if they have a horse, they can take that home with them, go back to your house, start building a life, start building a family. But you're not taking the slaves. That's done. Emancipation, proclamation. Emancipation is done. If we're going to be a country, a union, we cannot have this if we're going to progress. Dr. Martin Luther King said that how can you have a first-class country when you got second-class citizens? Can't happen. So Grant was later became president. So what's very interesting, I guess I'm coming into my Bible study here, but this fascinated me. What was interesting was after he became president of the Reconstruction, the South is totally devastated, right? So the Reconstruction, and now, your lifestyle, everything's going to have to change. You're not going to have this enslaved people. And so he brings a lot of reforms and so forth in Reconstruction, and, he's got it, finally, through a fighting process, he got it where African Americans can vote. It's a big deal in the South. And so they started electing officials and stuff, and they started becoming, representatives and senators and so forth. But then there's a lot that don't like it, right? And so this group called the KKK comes up, and starts, killing people and persecuting them. Finally, there is no more African Americans voters. There's like none of them are voting anymore. They're afraid to vote. So Grant, he was the one. He sent troops down there to stop them. And so there's another move that the enemy makes was he started making all this stuff up that Grant was a butcher. He was an alcoholic. He just got to be president by accident. He just got lucky. This guy was a tremendous planner and organizer, and he could see stuff that others couldn't see, and he knew how to press on through stuff. So he was a tremendous president, and he was well loved during his lifetime. But through the years, he got forgotten because a lot of myths and all this other stuff propaganda started coming up, and the president is overreaching his boundaries because he was sending troops down there to stop this stuff, but because he was very much for freedom and building a strong union, a strong country, but he was, he had to play this political game now because the enemy, there was politicians that were part of the KKK and sheriffs and so forth, and so they started promoting this ideology that, Grant was the evil one. That's what the enemy does, and you still see the same garbage happening today. You got somebody wanting to do something good, you're going to always have that opposition. It says, no, you're the evil one. You're overstepping your boundaries. You shouldn't do this. You shouldn't do that. And so that's kind of the stuff that's going on in the world. And so the South just ended up staying in this, for another decades, or for decades it remained, this oppression and stuff, until like into the 1960s, where it's starting to get some a new movement of reconstruction, what it's going to be like. And so as I was, watching that, seeing that, I thought it was very interesting of President Grant. But then I started thinking just about leadership and leading a country and the stuff you have to do, and then it brought me back to David. Okay, so David is this leader of this developing country and nation. Israel's been in the area for a number of years, maybe a few centuries, but they had judges before. They never had one big leader to really unite them together. And I believe God always had a plan to have a king there, okay, but it was going to be a king of his choosing. Man kind of raises up and says, oh, we want a king like other nations. Okay, I'll give you a king like other nations. That's a king after man's own heart. But God wanted a king after his own heart. And God wanted them to trust him for that king. So David was a man after God's own heart. Okay, he had a desire for the things of God. That didn't make him perfect. He made a lot of dumb blunders, mistakes. But isn't that normal going through life? That's one of the things I was watching this thing about Grant, all of his mistakes he made a bunch of blunders and mistakes. But, when you're going through something, you don't always know the right answer, but you got to make a decision. We pray about stuff, and sometimes we may feel a direction, but I'll be honest, in my life, a lot of times I don't feel that direction, but I got to make a decision. So you just trust it. Pray about it. All right, this is what I think I should do, so go this way. Maybe I can make adjustments along the way, but that's just life, isn't it? So here you got David, and God allows him to go through a lot. Here you got David just coming from the tribe of Judah, a shepherd, not possibly a well-known family or anything, but just the normal kid kind of being raised up, one that's kind of pushed aside. But God raises him up, and eventually he becomes a commander. Okay, eventually he becomes a general, we could say, in an army. But then he has to flee for his life. His own king is trying to kill him. And so this happens for a number of years that he's fleeing for his life. He even has to move to another country. A few weeks ago, we talked about him when he was in, what was the name of the town? Ziklag. When he was in Ziklag, he has his family captured. All of his men have their families captured. They get back home and nothing's there. Raiding parties came in and took everything, and then he's at a point where his own men are wanting to string him up, but he encouraged himself in the Lord. And when all this opposition is coming, you got to remember, you got to encourage yourself in the Lord. What is that? I think one of the things is to remember who you are. Okay? Remember who you are. Remember the anointing that God gave you. God filled you with the Holy Ghost. God filled you with His Spirit. God changed a life. He put that inside of us. He put something great inside of us. He gave us a new beginning. And we need to remind ourselves who we are. Right? We're not that other person anymore. Because there's something in us that can rise up and stand up for something. God could have just came and put a disease on all those raiding party forces, and wiped them all out, and then they could have got their wives back. It could have happened that something could have came in and just took care of the army and protected that family where they wouldn't have been captured in the first place. But it didn't happen that way. So even after this happened, David, he went and got the ephod on, which was that priestly garments, and he prayed, and God said, yeah, you can recapture them. But he had to go out there after them. He had to go get it. Okay, there's still a battle he had to go fight. He had to encourage his men, saying, hey, God told us, God's going to be with us. Let's go get them. Now, I don't know how far ahead they are. Maybe they're several days. And they just marched 3 days. I used to think that in those days, everybody rode horses. You had your commanders and stuff rode horses. Everybody else was, they were doing this, right? And so they're carrying their weapons and everything else. And so, you get tired, So he had to encourage his men, hey, we got to go, right? We can't stop. We got to press on. And that's what they did. So you got to run double time to catch up. And so now you're caught up with them. And you're exhausted. Now you got to fight. So that's it's just when you think about what is the situation that's going on, and what can you do? But it just showed the strength of these men. And then you see the hand of God in them. Maybe that's not even humanly possible, but when you see the hand of God in it, and that's why I guess interests me more is the hand of God. Is the hand of God in it? Can you see this just open, outright miracle? Maybe not, but you see the hand of God in it. God is moving on it. God has given them that direction. The Spirit of God's with them. It helped them, strengthened them to do those things. So that's kind of what I'm thinking on that, is this hand of God. But David, he's learning, right? He's learning. Okay, God's developed him on how to be a king. That's a development. And sometimes we go through stuff and we have no idea why we go through stuff. But is it God developing us in for something else? We don't know what the future holds. We don't know what's ahead of us. But I believe God is developing his children. We are a child of God, and God is in the process of developing us. Now, we can resist it. We can hold back, resist. But that's not a good thing. There's this thing called tough love. You guys heard of that, right? Tough love. What is tough love? What is tough love? You love somebody, and I guess when I guess I'm thinking of best example I can come up with is children. When you love them, and they always want stuff, right? And we can just give them everything they want. Now, I'm not guilty of that, but there's some that are. But it's not always good, right? Tough love is to say no. This isn't good for you. We're not doing that. But that's tough, because it's a lot easier to give in. My nature is probably to give in a lot more than I should. That's part of being a granddad, Brother Warren. We just in our instincts, we give in. But it's being that tough love, though. Especially when you see as your kids get older and stuff, when you see them going through hard times, it's easier to go in. not saying it's easy, but it's easier to go in and bail them out instead of just, you made your bed, lie in it. That's a little tougher, right? It's not that you don't like them. It's not that you don't want to help them. It's just that, hey, they need to learn this lesson. They're going to have to toughen up on their own. Life is tough. Life punches you in the face. You got to learn to punch back. Right? I'm not just going to accept this laying down. I got to get up and, fight back. Fight for what is right and what is good. Don't accept some lower standard of life and accept the way things are. And just don't accept, one of the things we got to realize, don't accept just the way we are. I can change this. Okay? I can change it. God has given me the power to change it. God didn't save me just to live any old way. Right? God saved us, made us a child of God. He's established us in his kingdom. He saved us by his grace. He saved us by his blood. And he's given us a new beginning. And he wants us to rise to a higher standard. Okay? We don't want to settle for a low standard. And sometimes to go to a higher standard, you got to toughen up. It's just life. You got to toughen up your mental ability, your spirit, stand up. Strong. So this brings me to this point. This is a long ways to get to the point I'm getting to. That was my introduction. It's only 25 minutes. Yeah. So at this point in David's life, I'm jumping ahead a little bit here, but I wanted to get to this point. So here's David. He ends up, a commander of an army. Eventually he's elected king over Judah. And then he's eventually king over Israel and Judah. So he has a united nation. And he fights a lot of battles in here with Joab and as his commander. And, he has all these victories. So he's really gaining, right? He's rising in popularity. People are trusting him. People are believing in him. People are loving him. He's a great king. He knows how to do things. And he has a palace. He has numerous wives, concubines. I'm not saying that's a good thing at all, but I guess in that day, this is one of those weird things, It's just hard to comprehend for us and living in our day why. But this is what he has, and he's in 2 Samuel chapter 11. It starts this narrative. So it kind of changes. Here you're seeing about David's struggles, but you're seeing his victories. You're seeing David just keep moving up the ladder, right? Eventually becoming king. So you got this low person down here as far as in society anyway, the shepherd. But he keeps moving up and eventually becomes this great leader, great king. People love him. They love the victory. They love the wealth that he's building in the country. People are doing a whole lot better now because we have this great leader, great warrior. And so overall, the people are probably doing much better, and they're loving David. But so eventually, though, there's still battles going on. Okay, there's still people wanting to attack Israel, and so David sends his army out to this place in Ammon, and they siege the town. David's at home in his palace. Often you would say that David should have been at war, but I don't know if that's true or not, because he can't be everywhere at once, right? So this is one front that they're fighting over there, but there may have been other fronts, to the north, to the south. Plus you're running a country, you're having to make a lot of decisions. I mean, this isn't easy stuff, right? It's hard, it's difficult. So, he's handling all the day-to-day stuff. So, yeah, you would leave your generals to handle, especially a siege. They're sieging this town, which could go on for months. You're just blocking off supply lines. You don't want to just go and attack a city. You're going to lose a lot of your army that way. So you just set up a siege. This is part of warfare. David, he's at home, and he's handling the things, affairs of life. And it happened. This is the way the New Living reads this. In 2 Samuel chapter 11, it was the spring of the year when kings normally go out to war. Isn't that weird to you guys? Just normally. It's nothing. It just normally happens, We're going to go out and kill each other. It's just normal. I can't imagine that. Even in the Civil War, the hand-to-hand, face-to-face combat. It's one thing, when you're shooting artillery, killing the enemy, but man, when you're face-to-face, and you got to take the bayonet and run them through, or you got to take a sword, that face-to-face combat is just, how do you live with yourself after that? How do you get rid of those visions and stuff? Yeah, I just don't see how you can. Seeing the agony and the torture and the look on people's faces, how do you handle that? How do you come back and keep your sanity? I don't know. But anyway, David sent Joab and the Israelite army to fight Ammonites. They destroyed the Ammonite army and laid siege to the city of Ramah. However, David stayed behind in Jerusalem. Late one afternoon, after his midday rest, David got out of his bed, was walking on the roof of the palace. As he looked out over the city, he noticed a woman of unusual beauty taking a bath. He sent someone to find out who she was, and he was told she is Bathsheba, the daughter of Eliab, and the wife of Uriah the Hittite. Then David sent messengers to get her, and when she came to the palace, he slept with her. She had just completed her purification rites after a menstrual period. Then she returned home. Later, when Bathsheba discovered that she was pregnant, she sent David a message. So I'm trying to wrap my head around this thing. So here's David, he's got his harem, okay? He's got his wives, but yet he's taking this late afternoon stroll, maybe evening, still somewhat daylight, and he sees this woman bathing. Now, of course, they didn't have running water, so I don't know. So the question is Bathsheba doing this on purpose? She hasn't been with her husband either for a while. So it's this desire that's coming up. I could see, she has this desire because she's not with anybody, but David is. That part of his life should be satisfied, right? So what's happening here? What's happening is that he is losing control. Now, he knows what the Word of God says. Okay, adultery is wrong. It's just flat out wrong. You don't take another man's wife. Now, he probably could go in there and almost take her by force because he was the king. He could do something like that. But it seems like, if you follow the story along, she went along with it. It seems like she didn't put up a lot of resistance. Maybe David could have been very persuasive, but it seems like there wasn't this force upon her. She seemed like she went willingly. She sends this. Then at the end, she sends this message back to David: "Hey, I'm pregnant." But you're just thinking, how could he do this? First of all, I'm thinking, what about the people living in the palace? What about his other wives? What about the messenger that's sent for her? All these other people are going to know what's going on, right? How are you going to hide this thing for very long? But David, he's going to try to cover it up anyway. So he gets this plan in his mind. He's a planner. Think, okay, this will probably work. I'll call for Joab to send Uriah home. Now, keep in mind, Uriah was one of the 30 of David's mighty men. Okay, if you read the list of David's mighty men, Uriah is listed among the 30. So this guy is a warrior. Right? This guy knows how to battle. He's good. And anyway, he sends for Joab, send Uriah back. So, he comes in, and, hey, Uriah, how's the war going? How's Joab doing? I just wanted to know. Why don't you just take it easy here, and you can head back later. Go on home. Wash your feet. Uriah is probably wondering, what is he doing? Any runner could have came and told him this message. Why is he sending for me? But anyway, but he's a warrior, man. He's committed. Now, as a soldier in that army, they commit themselves to that army. So they're not going to take a rest for pleasure while the other ones are still out there fighting. So Uriah, he's very strong in character and integrity. So he holds to it. He's not going home. He's not going to go home and enjoy the pleasures of his wife and being at home and resting. So he stays there at the steps of the palace and with the servants. David finds out. He's, hey, what's wrong with you, Uriah? Anybody else would have done this, right? So David said, well, let's stick around a little bit longer. And finally David invites him in here. Let's have a little celebration. Why don't you just dine with me here? And the Bible said he made him drunk. So here's Uriah. He's sitting at the king's table. He's thinking he needs to be out in battle. He's got the wine there in front of him. And he's probably not drinking it. But David said, come on, I'm your king. You got to drink a glass of wine with me. And so he drinks it. And he says, here's another one. And here's another one. Finally, he gets drunk. And David knows when a man gets drunk, his will is broken. And he won't be able to resist that temptation. And you know the story, he does. Okay, he doesn't go. So finally David writes this letter, seals it where he couldn't read it, and he says, here, give this to Joab. And then the letter goes to Joab and saying, attack the city wall, put Uriah in the front line and back away. So Joab does, and not only Uriah killed, but numerous other ones are killed in the same process. And Joab sent the letter and letting David know, hey, Uriah is dead. We lost these other ones. This battle was kind of messed up, but we lost that. David just says something like this: the sword kills one way and the sword kills the other way. That's life. That's battle. But at the last part of chapter 11, David, he thinks he's got this all figured out. He calls for Bathsheba to come back and be his wife. She has the son. Nobody's going to know any different. Uriah's out of the way. But there's one thing that he forgot. And that's in verse 26. It says, when Uriah's wife heard that her husband was dead, she mourned for him. When the period of mourning was over, David sent for her and brought her to the palace, and she became one of his wives. Then she gave birth to a son. But the Lord was displeased with what David had done. There's one thing you're not going to hide from. That's God. God was very much displeased. Man, he steals a man's wife, then had him murdered. You start thinking, how can a man after God's own heart, after all of these successes, after all he's been through, but yet he could not control that one area of his life? It's a very sad thing when you hear about these great men, these great ministers of God that pastored large churches and done tremendous work for God, but they fall in this area. What are the safeguards that David could have put in place? Some things you just can't avoid. There's, like in this instance, David, it's normal for people to go up on the top of their roof. This is the way houses were built. You catch the cool breeze of the day, a hot area and stuff. So that was normal. But how do you protect what you see? We know Joseph in the Bible, Potiphar's wife desired him, but, he took off and ran. There's some things you just don't fight. Okay? Lust, you don't fight. You run from it. Because lust will win. but these things was there in David's. He couldn't, there's some things you can do about, some things you can avoid, and there's other things that are very difficult to avoid. But when it does happen, maybe, when he saw that, maybe he should have ran downstairs. He should have done something different. Especially once he inquired of her and she was married. Now, if it would have been legal anyway, if she wasn't married, David could have invited her in and become his wife. But that wasn't the case. She was already taken. And she was married. So this became a great sin. But he didn't control that area of his life. He could control an army and all this other stuff, but this area got out of control. He didn't have safeguards set up. He didn't have a pre-plan. He didn't have a decision that was already going to be made. Now, some things you just don't want to have to think about at the time. You want to have that decision already made. Okay, when this happens, or if this happens, this is what I'm going to do. Okay, what's the exit strategy? But nowadays, it's difficult. Even worse in our days. Now, in the days of Rome, this stuff was happening all over. This sexual pleasures were just abundant. It was everywhere. But in our day, it's abundant. It's real easy. Before, not too many years ago, if you were going to go watch a movie, you had to go somewhere to watch it. Now, it came back where you could get it on your TV screen. It was restricted a lot. You used to only have 4 or 5 channels. So it was somewhat restricted, and then they kept it, lower, more family rated for the most part, but there was stuff on there. But then you got cable and all this other stuff started coming up, then all these garbage started coming in, and R-rated movies and so forth. And then but now, you don't even have to have cable or TV, you just put it in on your computer, you can stream. You don't even have to rent, you don't have to buy, you just got to have a subscription and you can get anything you want. And the enemy knows what draws your attention, right? Just like David, he's up on that rooftop. Okay. There's something there that's going to draw his attention. What better way to show him a beautiful woman, right? A man could be like this, going this way, sees that, and he's like, whoa, what's that? That's just the way things are. And so these temptations can come our way, and we see that, and that's what's in our minds. That's what gets in our hearts. And now seems like there's, adultery is okay, fornication's okay, just anything goes in a society. Like there's no restrictions, there's no disciplines. This is one thing. There's things that God created for the good, right? This relationship, intimate relationships is a good thing, but God has some guidelines, okay? He has some restrictions on it. It's between a man and a woman, a husband and wife. Great thing. A beautiful thing. That's the restriction on it. Okay, and that's the disciplines that we have on it. And it produces a great society and a great strong people that way because you have those disciplines. So, a life without discipline is not a life worth living, as it said. But you take a country without disciplines isn't going to be a very strong country. Take an army without a discipline. Can you manage an undisciplined army? No. You can't stand up against anything. It's going to fall apart. Now, life without discipline will fall apart. There's just bad results that come from it. And we need to learn how to discipline ourselves. This book that I'm currently going through is Play the Man. That's what it's talking about. You're setting up these godly disciplines, or just disciplines that God established in the Bible. And, sometimes those are hard. I've never been in the Army, but, you read the stories. I'm sure basic training, boot camps are tough. They're hard. And the guys that go through them realize they can do a whole lot more than they think they can. You can build yourself up. Your body can endure a whole lot more. But it's not only building up their body, getting their body tough, but it's mental toughness. And that's what we need in life is some mental toughness. What is mental toughness anyway? In our lives, I think it's this, can you give yourself a command and follow it? Can you make yourself do this thing? Okay? I know this is a better thing to do. This is a good thing to do, and I'm going to do this. I'm going to do this every day. And you develop that, hey, I'm going to be in control of my life, mental toughness. Now, it's not doing things that you just normally do. Us, most of us, or a lot of us, probably most of us in here know we got to get up and go to work, right? You got to do these certain things to provide for our family. Okay, we got to do these things. And so we get up and do this. There's certain things that you just do, right? But what about times that, I could do this also, but I just don't? It's that discipline. It's the safeguards. It's staying in control. So I know I was reading this book, Blake Man, and he's going through some different things, and it's a pretty hard standard, to hit way up here. But it's pointed out some stuff that, I really need to work on. I know I needed to work on it, but I kind of, throw it off. I'll get to it later. Procrastination is my greatest weakness. I'll do something about it tomorrow. Right? Always tomorrow. So you tend to procrastinate on it. It just bothers you sometimes when, whether you're reading a book or you're hearing it from somebody and they point out things in your life that you need to fix, right? It makes it hard. Now, it's easier to take those things when you read them in a book or if you hear it from somebody you don't know. It seems like it's harder, Pastor, when you hear it from the pastor, okay? Or you hear it from somebody you know, right? Because now you want to attack them. Now, notice this about David, though. Okay, this thing happened in David's life. God sends a prophet to David called Nathan. The prophet comes in and he says, David, and he gives him this story. So David's going to be able to relate really good with this story. He tells it about this man has this one little lamb that his family loves. They're taking care of it. And then there's this other guy over here. He's got all kinds of sheep and flocks. And he has a visitor. And instead of taking his own, or something from his own flock, and serving that to his guest, he goes and he steals this one little lamb that this family has and serves it. Well, David becomes furious. Well, who did this? We're going to take care of this thing. He said, David, that's you, man. You got all these wives, you got all this stuff. God blessed you so much. And he would have even gave you more, but you go and steal what this one man has. Boy, that would have hit home, right? Hey, this thing's no secret anymore. Okay? Cat's out of the bag. Now, David could react. I just killed this prophet. Get him out of the way. I don't like what he's saying. Now, a man after God's own, a man after man's own heart would have done that, because that's what King Saul tried to do when Samuel came in and pointed out Saul's error. Saul desired to have Samuel killed, and Samuel had to run and hide. But David, he humbled himself, prayed, and he realized, I messed this up. David was still going to be king. Going to be forgiven. But the Bible said the sword wasn't going to leave his house. He had turmoil in his family all the rest of his days. Even after his death, one of his sons, King Solomon, had to kill a brother. So that sword never departed. Okay, so he's going to reap what he sowed. He's going to reap something bad because he failed to control himself. And so this really speaks volumes to myself, is that, what is a result of this future? As I was talking a few weeks ago, the flesh just thinks of what's good right now. What's going to make me feel good at this moment? I want that. I desire that. And it fails to see the consequences of it. Okay, David enjoyed the moment. He had that moment. He never thought about the consequences that it was going to bring. Sometimes when you're in that moment, you don't think about the consequences. And maybe you've been there, maybe you're suffering consequences now of whatever decisions that we make. But going forward, how do we decide, hey, I'm gonna do better going forward? How do you build up your strength? How do you build up resistance to what this flesh desires? Because that's the key, isn't it? In Galatians, we read that the works of the flesh are these. The first three things it deals with was uncleanness, fornication. Those are sexual sins. That's one of the biggest things we deal with. And then it goes in and talks about anger, outburst of anger. We deal with fears. We deal with these things. These are works of the flesh. But the Scripture is telling us not to follow those things, but follow the leading of your spirit. So this is something that we do. It's not like God comes down and gives you direction in every area of your life. We want that, right? But it doesn't happen that way. But there is something in there. I know it's more than this, but there's that willpower that's got to be in us. I know Sister Teresa taught several weeks ago, it's not just that alone, it's the Spirit that works in us, but there has to also be that willpower in there. Hey, I'm going to do this. Okay, God has given me life. This is the life that God has given me. I want to honor this life that God has given me. I want to honor Him through this life, and so I am going to discipline this guy right here and follow the leading of the Spirit. Okay, how do you follow the leading of the Spirit? You got to know what the Spirit says. You got to know His Word, what it's saying to us. And that's how we follow the leading of the Spirit, through obedience to His Word and setting up some safeguards where we don't fall in to these sins that can not only destroy our lives, but it's destroyed others' lives also. Anyway, I'm out of time. God bless you. We're going to come back and have some church. Amen. God bless you today.